This is the Wandering Mind.
Welcome everyone to the Wandering Mind. Today I'm here with Ronika. Hey Ronika, how's it going?
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm so excited to be here. This is brilliant. Thank you.
Of course, I'm happy. I'm happy we found a time and I'm looking forward to this conversation a lot.
It'll be a good one.
Um, yes, definitely. Um, to get us into it, if you just want to start with introducing yourself, telling the people a little bit about yourself, your life, your journey, um, anything you want to share.
Yes. So I'm a screenwriter. I'm a writer. I'm an activist. I direct films. I run a film festival. Um, all sorts of big important CV milestones there. Um, Overall, I think if I had to classify myself, I would just classify myself as a writer. Um, I I've had a bit of a wild, quite long journey, which is where most of my work and most of my activism is centered around. I was born into a very indigenous, very secluded mountain tribe in India, but then lived in Austria for many years. I was brought into prostitution when I was very young, at the age of 16, and have experienced all sorts of really horrendous things. And at this point in the recording, I always have to give all kinds of trigger warnings to audience members who might not want to hear about more kind of darker things. I always keep it very light, and we're going to make jokes and be happy. But there are topics that I always talk about that might, so that's diligence done. Um, I came out of that when I was 20 and then moved to Ireland, where I started a family, and, started my writing career. So that's the last 33 years summed up in less than 30 seconds, um, which I hope will give everybody a bit of an overview of who they're dealing with here today.
Yeah, that's perfect. But yeah, I also can't wait to dive into more detail into all of the things you just mentioned. Um, so I guess a good way to do it is before we get to what you do right now, how you incorporate it into your art. Let's actually just go chronologically.
Yeah.
And you said you grew up in a indigenous mountain tribe. So
Yeah.
that's obviously something that is very interesting to anyone
Yeah.
listening. So how how is that lifestyle over there? How is the
It's
lifestyle of that tribe?
it was such an interesting, world to be born into. So I was born in I'm not that old. I was born in 1991. I'm not ancient. But when I was born, the house I was born into was made of clay and cow dung. It had electricity, but
Right.
barely. It had no plumbing. It had no furniture. It had, a clay kind of uh, fireplace. Um, no running water, no inside toilets. The people that lived there, we climbed the mountain every morning to cut grass for the livestock, with little sickles, and they would carry the grass on our backs. If we needed a bath, we would have to carry water from the well, on our heads, like you see in something out of National Geographic, really. Um, so
Yeah.
it was a very secluded lifestyle. I mean, and it changed so much. It has changed completely. I mean, my little sister drives a BMW and has Facebook on her smartphone, of course.
Oh.
So like it changed completely within the last 30 years. When
Yeah.
my cousins had their children, they had their kids in a fully equipped, perfectly modern hospital, whereas I was born, into a clay pot. Um, so
Yeah.
it has changed completely. But when I was born, it was a really wild area with little to no kind of creature comforts or Western comforts. Um, but growing up like that in my very, very early childhood was really, really interesting because it just kind of gave me this perspective of what tribal life looks like and living in a completely secluded community up a mountain in the Himalayas. Um, it's a completely different lifestyle to what we experience now. And my uncles, herded goats across the mountains, and my aunties spun the goat hair into cashmere wool, and that was what we did. Um, so the first kind of crafts you ever learned as a small girl was how to spin wool into cashmere fibers. Which is a really interesting kind of way of discovering your dexterity, I suppose. But then I moved,
Mm.
so my mother's Austrian, so I moved with her to Austria when I was 7. Um, and then I lived a very comfortable, nice upbringing in Austria for a long time. Until obviously my kind of brush with horrendous things in my late teens. Um, so yeah, yeah, it's very, very different. But I love talking about it because it just kind of having lived in so many different worlds is a huge blessing for me, I think. I'm very lucky that I've been able to live in so many different worlds.
Yeah, the good thing, I guess, is that you can. I mean, not that everything has to be compared, of course, but
Mm.
you've seen different sides
Mm,
of how people and humans on this world
yeah.
live, and especially with you mentioning that it even over there in the Himalayas, it has changed
Oh, really?
nowadays as
Yeah.
well. Um, so do you think that it actually gave you positive values in
Mm.
a sense growing up there in nature and in these landscapes and
I mean,
maybe
yeah,
this
100%.
simplistic life, right?
Yeah. Oh, I long for it. If I could go back, I would 100%. If I could trade in a TV for having to walk to the well to bring the water home every day of the week, I would much rather live that way than I live now. Like 100%, I would go back. So it is kind of it's a very ancient thing. I think it's a very instinctual, very old kind of longing that we have where your only entertainment is to sit by the fire and tell each other stories or sing each other songs that have been sung on this mountainside for 1,000 years. Um, it's a very, very old, um, deep memory that is deeply embedded in it reminds you of what humanity must have been like for most of humanity's history. And
Right.
that's very special to be able to say that I had that experience and I grew up for the first 7 years of my life. I grew up like that. Um, so I'm very, very grateful. If I had the choice, I would 100% go back. Um, so yeah, it, it, I was tremendously, like, it was hard and like, my parents are not nice people, and they're horrendous people, and they were just awful, and they are absolutely horrible. But everything that wasn't my parents, so the rest of my family and the rest of the tribe were so amazing and kind of gave me this really strong sense of what humanity probably looked like for most of our history. Um, and I have a very deep interest in studying those cultures and studying and understanding those kinds of communities. And I was very lucky this year. I mean, it's the end of the year, so 2024. I was very lucky to have been hired on a project where I adapted a historical novel called Earth Song
Mm.
into a feature film. Um, which centered exactly around this. It centered around the moment where matrilineal societies in ancient Europe switched over to a more patriarchal kind of system. So I was uniquely suited to write a film about tribal structures. And I was very,
Yeah.
very lucky to be able to work on a project like that. So I was very glad to kind of bring my deep understanding to what it is to live in a tribe, um, kind of to the surface and into a film.
Yeah. So, um, and then you said, so even before we go into what we're obviously going to go into in a second as well, but your upbringing in Austria, in general, must have been an experience as well because it's, I suppose,
Right.
completely different to what you did the
Yeah.
first 7 years of your life.
It,
So,
yeah.
what were the experiences there and being confronted
Mm.
with, I suppose, a city life? I don't know where exactly you grew up there.
We still lived very, very rurally, but my family was very comfortable, as the rich like to say. Um, so we
Yeah.
had we had we had many different houses where we could go, and we had a beautiful vineyard in the south of Austria, which was my favorite place in the world. Um, so we were very uh yeah, we were very comfortable, but it was my mother being who she was, she's very, very difficult and deeply damaged woman. So living with her was horrendous rather than anything else. It kind of distracted from any other kind of nice things that might have happened during my life. It was kind of put aside by virtue of who she was as a person. Um, but yes, coming to Austria and kind of being confined, I think there's a moment that I talk about often where as a small child, so we would visit, even when we lived in India, we would visit my Austrian side of the family. And there was a moment where I don't remember this, but I've been told this many, many times. There was a moment apparently when I was a toddler, maybe two, um, where they expected me to sit at a table and eat with knife and fork, which I had never done. We
Mm.
sat on the floor, and that's where we ate, and we ate with your hands. You don't have cutlery. You eat with your hands. That's how you eat. Um, and they gave me a little like drumstick chicken leg, and I couldn't. But they didn't give it into my hand. They put it on a plate and gave me knife and fork and expected me to eat and sit at a table, which was really unusual to me. And I didn't understand. And I almost fell off the chair, and I just didn't understand what was going on. Um, so I picked up my little drumstick and climbed off the chair and on the floor and just ate it like that. And my family are not nice people. Like they're awful people. Um, so they just kind of pointed and laughed at me, at this little savage child, sitting there on the floor with her chicken leg. I mean, how racist is that? Like, so racist, and that's
Mm.
what I was then. Therefore, henceforth, I was known as the little brown grandchild who couldn't sit at the table and behave herself. Even though I'd never been exposed to this, I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know what cutlery even was. Like, what were they forcing onto me here? And then they pointed and laughed at me when I tried desperately to just eat in the way that I had grown up eating. Um, so that just
Right.
paints a picture of what kind of family what kind of family I was living with. But it was such a visceral kind of disconnect there. When you're brought up in two different cultures, you're always, you're bilingual and your brain works differently, and sometimes a word will come out. Like we discovered earlier that we were talking that we both speak German. So like sometimes
Yeah.
my brain will just switch to the German word or to the Hindi word. Or to a different language. And I have to it takes effort to translate inside your head, but that goes even more so for cultural norms, or for kind of gestures and the way you count even. So in India, a lot of
Yeah.
people don't count like 1, 2, 3. We count 1, 2, 3. You count the numbers
Ooh.
on your kind of the knobbly bits on your finger. I don't know how to describe it. The knuckles.
Right.
Um, the knuckles, not by your fingers, but by your knuckles. Um, so like I find myself counting my knuckles when I have to count to more than five. And people will look at me strangely. And I'm like, yeah, no, that's how most of the world actually counts. Cause you can count to 12 on one
Mm.
hand. But that's not, it's these tiny little details that you don't really, unless you're growing up in two separate cultures. And a lot of people will really kind of understand that because it's a lot of people grow up in multiple cultures now. Um, but yeah, so that was kind of a shock. And then I went to school in Austria, and I was very lucky. I was sent to a very, very good school, and I was graced with a really good education, which I think saved me multiple times, I have to say. Um, so yeah, I went from being a tribal girl in the Himalayas to being a spoiled, rich Austrian girl with a vineyard. Um, within within months, weeks, 10 hours on a plane. Um, so yeah, I think and neither of those worlds were particularly great because my family wasn't particularly great. Um, so yeah, golden cage. I went from a clay hut to a golden cage, and neither of it was great. So yeah,
Yeah. I guess let let's talk about what happened when you were 16.
mm,
Um, how how did that all happen? How did you
yeah,
end up in prostitution?
yes. So one of the many reasons that I do the work that I do, and one of the reasons that we're talking to each other today, and a lot of my work, especially my activism work, and especially my charity work and outreach work, and all of the kind of that side of my day to day work centers around this topic. Um, because it didn't happen for me the way it happens for a lot of people, and it especially didn't happen for me the way it's always portrayed in media. Because in
Mm.
what is portrayed is that you get kidnapped and you get thrown in the back of a van and drugged and beat and then tied up somewhere in Eastern Europe until Liam Neeson comes and saves you. Um,
Oh.
I think no, that's not that was not my experience, and a lot of the women that I knew during my time there, that wasn't their experience either. Um, so what happened is that my parents, from a very, very young age, sexually abused me, especially my mother. So she created this really damaged um, kind of self esteem, or no self esteem at all, this really kind of damaged self-image that I had, about who I was as a person and what my purpose was. And my purpose, the way I understood it, was to please others sexually, which is a really damaging thing to do to your daughter. Um, which is why all this time I've been not singing her praises so much. So I will keep it
Right.
light, and I'm not going to go into details because we don't want to be gory and we do want to keep people here. Um, but obviously, through these experiences and through this kind of really damaging through these damaging things that my parents did, I didn't really develop my psyche didn't really develop in the way that it should have, right? So by the time I was a
Mm.
teenager, by the time I was 13, 14, I was drinking, I was you know, putting myself into really dangerous situations. I had run away multiple times. I was for a summer I lived with like a hippie commune um in like on the Czech border, and ate spiders and practiced free love, and I never did drugs, but everything else other than drugs I did. Um so when I was 16, I was already in this really damaged kind of frame of mind. I was already this really kind of broken and horrendously, yeah, broken girl. Um,
Mm.
so when the time came, and this charming and charismatic man who was twice my age walked into the bar that I was drinking in, um, I volunteered. I walked into this
Yeah.
life with both my eyes completely open. And the reason I did, and I think the reason that a lot of people who have experienced abuse very very early on then perpetuate the cycle of continuous abuse where they will put themselves into situations where or put themselves with abusers or return to abusers or seek out abusive behavior again and again and again is because at that point already I was convinced from the bottom of my heart that that was all I was worth anyway, that that was all I could do, that was all that I was capable of, all I was worth, right? So even though my parents didn't directly contribute to me entering that world, yes, they did, you know. Um,
Yeah.
so God bless him, he had easy pickings with me. He didn't have to work hard at all. Um, so it yeah. And that's why I always say it definitely didn't happen the way you'd imagine it to, because you'd imagine that I fought. You'd imagine that I didn't want this. No, I volunteered. I put my hand up and I volunteered. Um, Metaphorically speaking, I didn't obviously just actually put my hand.
Yeah.
So when we wonder, oh, how could anybody ever fall into this? And other than being drugged and kidnapped, how could you ever? That's how. It's an internal thing. It. And I'm not saying that people who seek out abusers, um, it's their fault. That's not what I'm saying. 100% not. But it is an internal thing where if you do not have self-esteem, if you do not have the inner kind of belief that you are worth more than what's being done to you, um, that can be very damaging. That can facilitate abusers to then just kind of pry away at that and really kind of put you all the way down. Um, so yeah, that's how it happened in a very practical sense.
So, as you've just described to us that mindset that you were kind of in that led to you um, going into this, did that change while you were working as a prostitute? Like, did that mindset at some point, did you realize these things while you were doing it? Or were you like, oh, this is because of the abuse, and or
Yeah.
was this only in hindsight afterwards?
Um, uh, Kind of half and half. And I think I understood at the time that it was definitely not normal for me to be this way.
Mm.
Um, I think I definitely understood that something was wrong with me. But I couldn't quite put my finger on what. First of all, because all the abuse that my parents had done to me felt normal. And it felt like, oh well, but I was lucky anyway because I'm still alive, and they could have beaten me, and they didn't. They just did other really, really horrendous things, but hey, they didn't beat me. Well, hey, right? So, uh, deeply traumatized people often will play down the trauma that they had to suppress it, and falsify memories, and because you cannot actually face the things that actually happen to you. I also have a condition called complex PTSD, which is PTSD, but my trigger points are slightly different, and it was created over a long period of time rather than just one traumatic event. Um, so my brain structure actually was formed differently. But as you said, all of this is hindsight, and all of this is the knowledge that I have now. At the time, I knew that something was very wrong with me, but I didn't really, I didn't have the capacity to be facing anything or healing from anything or doing anything to kind of work through that. And B, I genuinely thought that this is all of that. This was fine. I was fine. I really, really firmly believed that I was fine and that I was one of the lucky ones. Um, so it took a long time. It took 4 years. So I left when I was 20. So it took 4 years of this. And I finished school. Like I finished, uh, I got my Abitur, you would say in German. Matura
Yeah.
is in Austrian. So my high school diploma, essentially, I finished that. I went on to study law. Um, so I did all these normal things. But on the weekends, I'd be in a brothel. So I felt I was normal. I knew that something was wrong with me, but I didn't think that it was. It, I didn't think that it was so horrendous. Um, and then it very gradually happened. It happened in a very kind of very small increments and very, very gradually that I discovered that maybe, just maybe, I was worth more um, than that. I had been brought to Innsbruck. I had been trafficked halfway across the country. I had really, really horrendous experiences in Innsbruck. Like I'm not going to say any of that because it's just, we shouldn't. Um,
Mm.
but I was severely damaged and severely broken. Um, and I just hit rock bottom. I think I hit a place where I couldn't understand why I was letting this happen anymore. And I very, very gradually grew a spine and very, very gradually started to understand that I did have a certain degree of self-worth and I was worth more than this. And I could actually um, do other things because so what I became convinced of is that I have this stain on my life and I can never outlive the fact that I was a prostitute. It's never gonna leave me. So I'm never gonna be able to get a job. I'm never gonna be able to have a family. Nobody's ever gonna love me. Um, None of that is true. That is
Yeah.
true. And now, 14 years later, 13 years later, here I am talking to you about it, talking everywhere about it, wherever I'll never shut up about it. As a matter of fact, and I'm not ashamed of. I've never been ashamed of it. I was never ashamed. Even then, I wasn't ashamed. There's never been an ounce of shame about this part of my life. Um, but I didn't know that at the time until one day it got so bad that I just said, "Well, F this. I'm out. I can't do this anymore. Consequences be damned. No matter what the consequences are, they can't be as bad as this. I'm gonna leave." And I had built up tiny little bits of moments of self-esteem. Like I would buy myself my favorite tea, which I had never allowed myself to do before, and just allowed myself to live a little bit and breathe a little bit. Um, and that grew my spine enough to be able to leave.
Um, w- well, obviously, like you said, we definitely don't need to go into
Yeah.
all the horrible details, as we shouldn't. But I do find that part interesting because we established how um, probably a lot of women go into it voluntarily because of the things that you describe. Um, but obviously, I just suppose the conditions aren't very wonderful. And you also
No.
mentioned that if you want to get out, it might prove problematic, right? So,
Yeah.
so how was that? Basically saying, "Hey, I'm done. I'm getting out of it."
Yeah.
How was that?
That was months and months and months of struggling and hardship. And now, again, I have to say, I really was in a very, very uniquely lucky position. Um, in that the man that I had been with, Um, and I won't say his name because, I won't. Um, but the man I was with, the man I had met at 16, I often, I always say that I don't 100% blame him. Really, I don't actually. Um, I'm not saying I'm fond of him, um,
Right.
but I don't hate him. I definitely, definitely do not hate this man. Um, and there's a deep sense of forgiveness and a deep sense of camaraderie, really, when we dig all the way down. The reason being, and I have a very kind of, I have a very kind of elaborate reason for this. But I'll come back to your question. I promise. I'm just going on a little detour.
No
Um,
worries.
so the reason I don't have any hard feelings towards this man, and I never could and never will blame him uh, very much for everything that happened, is that he was just as broken as I was. He had been thrown out of his home in the depths of winter at the age of 15 and left to fend for himself. Um, he was as deeply damaged and as deeply broken as I was. And by the time I came around, he had done horrendous things, of course, but he had also learned a lot of lessons that had brought him a lot of wisdom. And he loved me, unfortunately for him,
Mm.
um, which I don't think was usual for him. And I don't think there were many women that he actually did love. But he loved me. After 4 years, it took him a while to actually fall in love with me. Um, But he did. He did, and I'm 100% convinced, and now I will come back to your question, and now I will tell you why I'm so convinced that he loved me. Um, I think I knew that he loved me before he ever did, and I think he didn't realize until it was too late, as these things often go. Um, so it was the 12th of April, 2012. I stood on my bed, drank some delicious tea that I had bought for myself, and walked out the door and said I was done and got myself a normal job. I worked at Amnesty International actually just shortly after.
Mm.
So I got myself a job. The first job was just like a little call center job, and my second job was Amnesty International. And so I got myself a job. I got myself a second job. I started looking for apartments, and I just said, "Oh, I can do this." Gosh,
Yeah.
what a surprise! The girl who got into law school and work at Amnesty. Good Lord. Um, so, I wasn't a complete, I didn't have to throw my life away completely. I was worth something all of a sudden. It was such a surprise to me. I was like, oh my
Mm.
God, so who would hire me? And they did. Um, but I called him in the afternoon and I said, I got a job. And he said, what? And I said, no, I have a job. Um, I'm looking for an apartment. I'm done. And he said,
Yeah.
well, like, no,
Yeah.
you're not. Like, what are you talking about? No, you're not. This is ridiculous. And I think it was the next day, actually. I think it was a Thursday. And he said, you're coming home tomorrow anyway. You're coming home on Friday anyway. Like, don't be ridiculous. I'll see you tomorrow. Like, don't be ridiculous. Whatever phase you're in right now, this is just stupid. Um, Come home tomorrow and we'll talk about it. And I came home. And it was like a 3-hour train ride from Innsbruck back to where we lived. And he just sat me down and he said, "What are you talking about? Like this is ridiculous. What are you talking about?" And I said, "No, I'm I'm done." And in the weeks and months that followed, um, this man's life completely fell apart. Like I wasn't the only girl. I wasn't the only girl that he was seeing and dealing with. Um, but something must have changed when I changed. Because in the months that followed, he broke up with everybody. And he broke up with his kind of main girlfriend that he had been with for 16 years at that point, who I
Yeah.
respected. I respected her so much. And if she showed up at my doorstep today and asked me for a kidney, I'd be like, which one do you want, left or right? Like, take it. I respected her so, so much. And she was this incredibly wise, wonderful woman that I worshiped the ground she walked on. But anyway, he broke up with her. He broke up with everybody. He sold his like little business that he had on the side, um, and started writing and found God essentially. Became
Wow.
this deeply spiritual man. And I sat him down after a few months and I was like, what's going on? Because like I quit prostitution. I didn't ne- you didn't need to. Like I'm not forcing you to do nothing. And he said, no, what I did to you was unacceptable. I'm never gonna do it to any other person ever again. I love you, and the fact that I'm capable of loving you, and the fact that I lost you because of what I did to you means that I should never do this again. And I got in touch with him. I got in touch with him 10 years later. I got in touch with During COVID, I got in touch with him. He found me on Instagram and just kind
Mm.
of slid into my DMs, which was the biggest shock of my life. I was like, what?
Right.
What? Joe? And he said he had like this profile picture of this like really comfortable, because he's in his 50s now. Like he's well into his 50s. He's, bald and has like this big great beard, and was wearing this like, and he was a Hell's Angel when I met him. So he was like this really dangerous man. And then he was wearing this big Hawaiian shirt. He left the club. He's not a Hell's Angel anymore. He's wearing this big Hawaiian shirt and he looked like this really comfortable old hippie guy, you know? Um, so again, that's not how it normally goes. Okay. That's definitely not how it normally goes. So again, I was really, really lucky in that, he did fight like the first few weeks and months before he had this kind of big revelation and this big kind of literal come to Jesus moment. Um it was very difficult and we fought and I felt threatened. I was fearing for my life, I was fearing for my family's life. He made really, really horrendous threats and tried every which way to get me to come back. And when I
Mm.
didn't, he started realizing that something had gone horribly, horribly wrong in his own life. Um, and that I was just kind of, I'm not saying I saved this man's soul. I really, nothing, it had nothing to do with me, really. Um, but my quitting seemed to be a catalyst for him to realize that he was ready to go on his own healing journey. Um,
Right.
which I think is a really, really beautiful thing. And again, I'm not, trying to say that I'm this big messiah who saves people. I'm
Mm.
convinced it had nothing to do with me. It was just his time as well, to kind of liberate himself from this world. Because we always think about, the pimp side of things as, oh, these are these violent, horrible men. Of course they are. Of course they are. But in order to become a human being who is capable of raping another human being or beating up another human
Mm.
being, first you must be tremendously damaged yourself. A healthy human
Right.
being does not do this. It's not possible for a healthy human being to do this. So the core issue for everybody who perpetrates violence against anybody else is that they're broken. And the fact that most of them do not have the capacity to unbreak themselves and to heal themselves just means that we should be working harder to help, you know? And that's one of the reasons one of the themes I talk about a lot, and always come back to is masculinity and how healthy masculinity um can help address these issues. Because obviously the flavor of masculinity that he had um was very, very damaged but the flavor, the comfortable hippie guy with his big Hawaiian shirts, who's giving me God's blessing. Um, it's a healthy man. That's a healthy man. That's wonderful. I love that. You know, um, so I do not view him as the perpetrator, just as the perpetrator. I view him as a victim who found liberation alongside me.
Um, yeah, I mean, obviously, all my experiences with the topic just came from what you told me. So, I'm just trying to think of a way to ask that question. Um,
Yes.
bec- because it, I mean, to me, it's just super interesting to think about. wh- And obviously, it's a huge problem in the whole world. So talking about a solution is also very utopic. But
Yeah.
um, what, in your opinion, how do you think that we can address these things, especially with what you just mentioned, with being
Mm.
everyone that is involved in this in some sort, like in whatever way they're involved, they are broke. And how
Yeah.
can we address these things and maybe use them to find a solution?
Legalizing it. Radical legalization. Radical. Across the board legalization. Um, Bringing it out into the light. Germany, Austria, and the Netherlands are a fantastic, beautiful, gorgeous example of this. Um, in those three countries, it's not only legal, but it's regulated. You pay taxes. You have medical
Mm,
checkups. Um, you know it. The police can walk into a brothel, and nobody bats an eyelid because everybody's like, "Hi, how are you? Yeah, everything is fine.
right.
Nobody has a black eye. Like we're all healthy. We got our medical checkup on Tuesday. Here's the little book where you have to have a stamp in every week to make sure that you're healthy. And if you need to look at my last lung scan that scanned me for a TB, that was in March. Go have a look. It's on the file. Where is it? Where in there will you have room to be tied up and kidnapped and thrown into the back of a van? You don't. There's no room for that because there's light shining everywhere. There's no dark corners if the light is shown everywhere. If you can if I could put onto my CV, from 2008 to 2012, this was my
Mhm.
job, and nobody would bat an eyelid. They're like, "Oh yeah,
Right.
fine, yeah, of course, fine." Experience, I guess. Yeah. Do you have sales experience? Yeah. You better. You bet I do. You bet I can sell you champagne like nobody else can, honey. Do you have dance experience? Yeah. And climb up that pole like you wouldn't believe. You know. Um taking out all of the stigma, the kind of the darkness, that's the best thing. That is the best thing we as a
Mhm.
society can do. Because all of a sudden, it's not there's no temptation to if you have to pay taxes on something, um, you know, if nobody else is gonna check it, the tax man is gonna check it. You know,
Right.
the government is gonna know about what they could earn, tax-wise from this.
Mm,
But all of a sudden, trafficking it becomes less interesting, because you know, and all of a sudden women who do, or women and men, everybody, whoever wants to enter into this profession has a safety net. Because you're paying taxes, you're paying into social security, you're paying into whatever, your medical
mm,
bills, your everything. So if you need to be unemployed all of a sudden, because you paid in, you it's a job. It's a job. It's fine. It's a job. And also, all of a sudden, mental health services can hook into that. Okay. So all of a sudden, this young girl who is struggling with her mental health, and that's why she thinks that this is all that she's worth. Oh, because you have your medical checkup, your doctor can check you up mentally as well and realize, oh, this girl is psychologically probably not in a place where she should be doing this. Let's hook her up with some mental health services, um, which is paid for by the taxes that she pays because she earns money from a real job. Um, so we can provide them with mental health services or addiction outreach or housing outreach, right? So i- that the whole system falls apart if light is shown on it, right? So really the best thing you can do, and that's one of the many, many kind of avenues that I always try to be loud about. And here in Ireland especially, like it's an absolute, oh my God, it's a nightmare. It is a nightmare the way it is here in this country. It's just horrendous. Like I don't even know where to start. I've made a few small starts here and there, but it's not. It's horrendous. So it'll be a lifetime of work for me, I think. But yeah, the best thing society can do um, is take the shame out of it and shine a light onto it, and regulate um, all of the things that I just said. Yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah, we don't need to go into too much detail about it because you just said the way it works in Ireland seems to be horrible. But
Oof.
I do wanna know, in your opinion, what do you think are the one or the two main reasons of why governments seem to be so against like legalizing it?
I think that historically speaking, I think it's very much a cultural kind of problem. Ireland especially is
Mm.
obviously a very, very Catholic country. We only
Right.
legalized gay marriage about 10 years ago. Abortion was legalized about 6 years ago. Divorce was legalized 20 years ago. So it's coming into its own,
Mm.
but it's a very young country in the sense that progressive ideas definitely don't take root here very quickly. Um, but as we can see with platforms like OnlyFans, you know, there is a shift. There's a societal shift. I don't think if you tell a 20-year-old, um, hey, I do sex work, they're not even gonna they're not even gonna flinch. They'll be like, yeah, cool. What? Yeah, whatever. If you tell a 75-year-old, they're gonna be like, oh.
Right.
So, the societal change that is necessary is happening. It's just happening very slowly. Um, so at this point, I'd say just wait it out. The next generation is definitely going to fix it. Gen Z is going to fix this. Gen Z is going to fix everything. Gen Z is just going to fix it. You're like, why are we upset about this? Who cares? We need to get taxes. Get them tax dollars. Let's pay for this. There's money there to be had. They could pay for preschool preschool meals. Um, so I think with a lot of the work that's being done, and a lot of my wonderful, wonderful colleagues that I'm so grateful to be working with on many occasions, uh, it, it will happen. This dream world that I'm dreaming of, where everybody who wants to go into this line of work is held by a safety net and has mental health checkups and gets looked after. Um, I think we're on our way there. Um, but the one thing, yeah, that we could do in countries where it's completely kind of shunned is just to talk about it. Is just to have everybody who's listening now could have a conversation with their loved ones and say, "Oh, by the way," or at the next town hall with their politician, they could ask, "So what's your stance?" No, I have never heard a politician be asked about their stance on what they think of
Right.
sex work. Never. Not once. It doesn't come up in town hall meetings. It doesn't come up in interviews. It's not talked about ever. So just talking about it is already the best thing that we can all do. Um, which is why I won't shut up about it.
Yeah. Um, so that already gives us a good view in your activist side of things,
Yeah.
if that's what I can call it, and
Yeah.
what the passion is behind that. Um, I do want to transition also to your creative side.
Yeah.
So we painted a picture of someone who went to school, law school. You said a call center job, Amnesty International. So yeah,
Mhm.
I'm just curious, where does the passion for this creative work come from, and how did you get into pursuing more creative work?
Yeah. Um, so I'd always been a writer. So I think storytelling and writing has always been a really, really important part of who I was as just as a human being. I don't think I would have been capable of living uh at all uh, had it not been for the possibility of having a creative outlet. Now, I'm a writer, that's my main thing, but I also paint. I love music. I do lots of like little crafts. I crochet. I embroider
Mm.
things. So there's never really a moment where I'm not trying actively to create something. And I think sanity. I think I have to.
Mm.
It has definitely been the most kind of integral part to my healing process. Um, was a sense of purpose. Was a sense of I've been through all this and all these really horrendous things happen to me. But if they don't lead into something, if they don't pour out into something, what was the point? If all of this experience and all of these different lives and these different worlds that I lived in, if they don't now allow me to create something, um, and it always feels like I would be doing my life a disservice if I didn't now, you know, let it be something. If I didn't now let it be used to fuel something. Um, so it's a responsibility almost. It's like, no, you've done all this. Now you gotta, you've done the sad backstory. Now comes the meteoric rise. Like it has to. It just has to. It has to be something more than all this. Which is something I'm, quite comfortable with and quite happy with. Um, so yeah, I think the creativity is a really, really integral, important part. Um, I wouldn't function without it. Yeah.
Right. Um, so obviously, the one thing that I'm super interested about that you mentioned is you run a film festival. So,
Yeah.
um, maybe if you can take us into the build up to all that as well, because obviously
Yeah.
you didn't. I suppose you didn't just go film festival and there it was. So,
Yeah.
so how did
I did.
how
I
did
did
that
actually.
develop?
That's exactly how it happened.
Oh,
Um, so yeah, it was so we were shooting. So I started in film in about 2019, I'd say. Just writing screenplays. And then in 2022 I had been hired to write a film, a feature film. And I was working on set in a little town here in Ireland, in Wicklow, which is a county here in Ireland, called Greystones. And we were just on set, and then I was shooting a short film a few months later in that same little town. And so I had started out in film, and I was directing. I had been hired to direct a TV pilot in London. Um, I can't really put my finger on how my career in film started. It just kind of did. I just kind of wrote, and then things happened, and I don't know how I did it to this day. I have no idea. I don't know what I did right, or wrong. I don't know. Um, but anyway, so we were on this little film set. It was just me and a bunch of other people. We were just trying to get this short film made. that was very much about Wicklow, this county, um, because the main reason was because Wicklow County is always used as a set. So Disney shot their Enchanted sequel there. Um, Russell Crowe's Exorcist film, The Last Duel, Cocaine Bear. I can't even count all the films that were shot. The new series of Wednesdays being shot there right now. Um,
Mm,
the uh, Valhalla, Vikings Valhalla, a lot of hundreds of millions of scenes from Game of Thrones. Um, so a lot of Hollywood was always using this county as their backdrop for all of their Hollywood shit. And but it was never Wicklow. It was never actually uh the stories that originated here. It was never actually about the people from there. It was always Hollywood using it as something else. Like
mm,
it could be Westeros or Viking era Denmark or Canada or wherever it needed to be, middle-aged Europe or whatever. It um it's never Wicklow. And so we shot this little short film and called it Wicklow Stories, because it was an anthology of lots of little stories that took place on this beautiful pier in Greystones Town. Um, and it was about Wicklow people. It was about people from Wicklow who lived in Wicklow, who lived in Greystones. And this fantastic woman whom I love deeply and dearly saw us shooting this film, and she just kind of came over and kidnapped me and said, "Okay, well, hold on now a second. You're shooting something that's called Wicklow Stories. I want to know more." I said, "Yeah, yeah." So I gave her all the reasons, and this is why we're doing this because it's our story. It's the stories that come here that we want to experience them. And she said, "Where are you going to show this film?" I said, "Gonna go on YouTube. It's not gonna do anything because there's no real festival that it could go into." Um, and she said, "Let's make a festival." And I said,
oh, wow.
"Fair enough, let's." Um, so we put this festival together, and we just had our third year in October. And the only kind of criteria to be able to show your film at our festival is that it has to be made in Wicklow and be about Wicklow stories. And the festival is called the Wicklow Stories Film Festival. Um, and we've had tremendous support from all over the country. We've, made national news. We were some of the biggest festivals in Ireland actually kind of came. One of the directors of the biggest film festival in Ireland, which is the Dublin International Film Festival, she came just to kind of say hi and kind of pat us on the head and say good job. Um, So we've had, major celebrities come by, and the local radio station obviously had been tremendously kind to us and always giving us coverage and red carpet stuff. And it's yeah, it's become one of the red carpet highlights of the county. So
Mm,
I don't really know. Again, I don't know how these things happened, but they all just kind of fell in line. And it's more down to my partner Marlena, who's doing all of the work. She's amazing. She's much more amazing than I am. She does all of she's amazing. She's just fantastic. Um, and without her, I don't think the festival would be running at all. Um, so yeah, again, it just it, it's exactly like you said. We decided that there should be a festival, and then there was one. So it was very much kind of oh yeah, let's yeah. What's the worst that could happen? And none of the bad things happened, and all the wonderful things happened. So yeah, very very lucky.
that's pretty cool, and I really like the theme of it as well. As you've said, to just highlight the county, highlight the people, and
Yeah,
it's a that's a great cause.
yeah,
Um, so you also kind of said, well, you just ended up in film.
Mm.
You had some opportunities, and now you're doing these films, and now you're doing a film festival. For you as a writer, what and again with the comparison, but writing and film, what do you think are the things that one medium, or basically, um, maybe some things is film better to use, and specific things
Mhm.
is writing better for specific
Mhm.
things? What are the differences between these mediums?
I think, well, it really depends. So a lot of my film work, film is a very, very fantastic medium. But it's always a collaboration. It's always an amalgamation of lots of different voices.
Yeah.
Whereas with writing, especially with kind of with novel writing or poetry especially, um, it's really just your own. And you're naked on the stage and completely open and vulnerable. Whereas in film, the final decision isn't yours; it's the producers, and not even theirs. It's the investors, or whoever else is sitting somewhere in the chain in the hierarchy. So when we go back to the project that I was lucky enough to work on this year, um, the the uh, the Earth Song project, um, the novel adaptation, it I wrote the screenplay, and it'll say my name on the credit. It'll say screenplay by me, but none of the decisions, not a single decision that goes into anything in this film. It's a huge, big blockbuster, big budget production. None of the decisions are going to be mine,
Right.
which I'm happy with because I don't need to. I'm so lucky that I get to play this really small part in telling this amazing, large scale kind of Lord of the Rings esque story. How
Mhm.
lucky am I that I get to play a small part in it? So with film, it's always this like really collaborative effort. And even when you're directing, um, you're not it's not just you're not a dictator, you're a director, right? So it is you are going to collaborate, and actors are going to have input, and your writer is going to have ideas, and your producer is going to have ideas, and your costume designer is going to have ideas, and your editor is going to have ideas, and your composer is going to have ideas, and your color grader is going to have ideas. Like it's all of these different beautiful ideas and all of this amazing creativity that just gets thrown into this ball. And sometimes it works and it comes out brilliantly. And sometimes it really doesn't work at all. And it comes out really shit. And you have to take those as well. You're like, there are films in my career where I'm definitely like, oh my goodness. So did we really do this? We did this? Really? Oh no. Like, let's not. Let's not do that again. Um, so, you have to kind of it teaches you humbleness. It really does. It teaches you to be very, very humble very, very quickly. And you learn a thing or two about collaboration and about teamwork and about not being the biggest voice in the room or having the biggest ego in the room because ego has
Right.
no place. And when it comes to kind of the other side of my writing, which would be prose or I do a lot of poetry, so I publish a poetry collection every year. Um, so with that, it's it's very, very personal. And it's very especially
Right.
with my poetry collections. And the reason I publish one every year, it's almost like so this year it'll be my fourth year. Um, so it's almost like a diary. It's almost like a journal.
Right.
Of and it kind of chronicles my development. Um, and because it's poetry, it's very kind of, um, you know, substantial and very, very fragile at the same time. It's ethereal. You can't capture
Right.
poetry ever, really, I don't think. And you shouldn't. Poetry is not to be captured, it's to be experienced. And it's to be, let out into the ether like a butterfly. Um, so with that kind of writing, it's very different. Nobody has a s nobody can even interpret poetry except in their own very specific way. Um, so it's the exact opposite of my kind of my proper job, which is screenwriting. Um, it's the exact opposite of that. So it's very kind of liberating and free and very, yeah, like I said, ethereal and out there, and not structured at all. And I don't have a deadline because I don't give myself a deadline. Um, so yeah, and I have a novel in the works as well, called Akil, which is very experimental. And let's see when that comes out. Let's see. I have to finish it first. Um, Maybe by the time this podcast comes out, I will have completed it. I doubt it, but so that's a different approach again because it's very kind of that character is just very broken and damaged, and he's an unpleasant man. Maybe I shouldn't write about him. But, well.
He's
He's interesting, let's say. And if that book's ever gonna see the light of day, maybe we could talk again. Discuss all the
love to.
psychological trauma and jump into him.
Um, well, that's actually sort of an answer to a question I didn't even ask yet because I always love to look out into the future as well.
Mm.
So you obviously said you're working on a novel, um,
Yeah.
but other than that, in in general, obviously in your creative career, but also maybe personally, like we just
Mm.
established, you do a lot of things. You're
Yes.
active, like you're an activist. You
Yeah.
um, have the festival, you have your screenwriting job, you have your creative outlets all over. Um, so just in general, what's kind of your goals and aspirations for the future at the moment?
Okay, that's really interesting. I like that because I found that as soon as I chase something, it tends to not happen, and as soon as I let it go, it tends to just arrive. Um,
Mm,
so on my screenwriting side, obviously, I'm very very grateful to be working on this novel adaptation. Let's see where that goes over the next few years. We have some things that project needs. Um, I have a few scripts with a few production companies at the moment. So a few negotiations are ongoing with other projects, um, which is great, which is fantastic. Um, so my screenwriting side is you know is trudging along as exactly as it should, and I'm very proud of the work that I do there, and I'm just so happy that I get to do that. Um, but I wouldn't want to really be very prescriptive about it. I would just kind of let it come as it decides to. Because again, I find that if I'm actively, like, absolutely desperately, desperately, desperately chasing something, um, it never happens. It just runs away from you. Um, so whatever comes my way in my professional life, I'm gratefully going to accept. Um, with my kind of poetry and novel side, it's such a beautiful creative outlet. I think I'm just going to continue exactly in the way that I have been. It makes me very happy. And then on my personal, in my or just generally in my life, I've spent the last 2.5 years traveling a lot. I've been traveling. I've lived all over the place. I think I've lived, oh God, maybe 13 different places over the last,
oh wow.
2 years. Yeah, it's been, yeah, I lived in Spain, I lived in London, I lived in the south, kind of the south of the UK. Right now, I'm here in Cork. Normally, I live in Dublin. I went to France lots of times. So I've been traveling. Um, so I'm really looking forward to settling down. I'm going to settle down in Dublin for a while. Um, the ultimate goal is to buy a house in France, but that's kind of within the next decade. Um,
Mm,
so, but yeah, I think settling down and I'm never gonna not travel. I'm never gonna stop traveling. I think it's not possible. Um, Settling down, writing, just in general, being very happy. I think that that's a nice break from all the from all the drama. Is a well deserved little break from all the drama and all the horrors. Um, so I think I'll focus on that for now.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense in the picture that we've just painted. And I mean, you you pretty much have it figured out, right? You do what you love.
I
You
mean,
just let it come to you.
no. It sounds like it, doesn't it? It really, I make it sound so easy, don't I? It's really not. Yeah. I really don't have anything figured out. I think that's one of the things that I'm really actually grateful for. Is that having gone through very difficult things, you kind of lose fear a lot. So, say
Mm.
if my car breaks down tomorrow, that's not the worst thing that's ever happened to me. Let me tell you. Definitely not the
Right.
worst thing that's ever happened to me, right? Because the worst thing that's ever happened to me is a lot worse than anything that's likely to happen to me, um, ever again in my life, right? So it just gives you that kind of base layer of if once you've actually healed, once you've actually gone through a lot of therapy, and done a lot of work on
Mm.
yourself and really, really worked with yourself to be happy and to accept yourself and to love yourself and to that takes work. Like that was years and years and years. I don't think I loved myself truly, really until I was 32, until about a year ago, maybe year and a half ago. So yeah, now I sound really happy and now I sound like it's all coming at roses, but that was a lot of work. That was severe depression. That was suicide attempts. That was drinking at times. So that was medication for depression. That was years and years and years of therapy. Um so yeah, this whole blissful kind of chilled out vibe, that I'm giving off, is definitely reachable and everybody can achieve all the zen that I'm portraying, um, but not without paying horrendous amounts of therapy
Right.
costs and spending hours and hours and hours crying, and spending weeks and weeks and months of your life being severely depressed, and having PTSD flashbacks and understanding what PTSD flashbacks are and how to get through them, having panic attacks, having nervous breakdowns, having really horrendous mental health experiences. Um, so that I really want to stress that, but that it's not, "Oh, you go through horrendous things and then you click your fingers and everything is fine." That's really not what it is. It's a lot of work. But once you've done that work, you can be really, really happy. You can do really, really amazing things. You can have wonderful relationships with wonderful people and live a very fulfilled life. It is possible, even if you've gone through really dark times. Um, so I always just kind of want to stress that.
Um, no, I actually want to, because I always like the positive side, but
Yeah.
as you've just said that, I really find it important as well. So maybe if you can speak to that a little bit more, I really find that interesting. Because maybe a lot of people don't know or they're not capable of starting on that journey. Well,
Mm.
what can
No.
you tell the people?
Yeah.
Because you,
It
like I said, we've seen the outcome with you, and yeah, maybe some people just can't get on that journey yet.
mhm. And that's a really important, um thank you for asking that. That is really, really wonderful. Um, that's probably the most important thing, that we've talked about today. Starting on that journey. So say you're let's have a look at the girl I was on April the 11th, 2012, the day before I decided that I was gonna leave. Um I was this horrendously depressed, bruised, battered, beaten, young woman. And I was 100% convinced that I was worth nothing more than this. I was worth nothing more than the bruises on my body, and on my soul. And I knew that I wasn't. I was 100% convinced. So I speak very often with women who have gone through domestic violence, for example. And the conversations I have with women who are stuck in a domestic violence situation, and not just women, of course. It's just that I mainly work with women, but domestic violence can happen, of course, to everybody and anybody. Um, so I don't want to exclude any gender from that. But I just happen to work with a lot of women. Um, so what they say to me is that they feel so guilty for leaving. They feel, um, on the one hand, they feel like they're going to be questioned of why didn't you leave sooner if it was so horrible? Clearly, it wasn't that horrible if you
Mm,
stayed. And the second thing is
right.
that they feel like they're really, really full of themselves and arrogant for wanting to leave. And they're like really vain, for thinking that they deserve something better, because how full of yourself do you have to be for leaving your partner? Like, oh my God, how shit of a person are you? That's the kind of inner monologue that goes on within you when you're stuck in this situation. You're like, I don't know, could I ever possibly begin um to leave when clearly I don't deserve any of the good stuff anyway. And also, this would just make me the most arrogant, self-obsessed, um, horrendous person ever, which is what narcissists make you believe. And a lot of abusers tend to have narcissistic tendencies. Um, so when you're with a narcissist, what they make you believe is that you're the narcissist and that you're this really um, bad person, um, which is just a complete twisted approach. But that's how it often that's how it is, you know. Those are the
Right.
patterns that abusers will very often create in those dynamics. So what can we do? We're in this situation. We're in this really horrendous moment. We are living with an abuser, or we are being abused by somebody, or we're just in a really difficult life situation. Maybe there's no external abuser, but you're just mentally abusing yourself because you're severely depressed about something that happened previously. And so nobody externally has to tell you that you're a shit person. You'll tell yourself you're a shit person over and over and over again until you believe it. Until you believe it so much that no other voice could ever have a chance. And even the people who love you and tell you, no, 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 you're not a shit person. You're a nice person. You're worthy of love and you're worthy of everything. Not going to penetrate. That's not going to penetrate the layers and layers of self hatred that depression gives us. Um, so what do we do? What can we do? Right. So there's a few, I always call them like little challenges, that I always say. So for example, when I work with women who have come into a women's refuge, um, what I like to do is tell them to sit with themselves. I always say naked with yourself. Um, you don't have to physically be naked, just mentally naked with yourself,
Right.
for 10 seconds. And that doesn't seem like a very difficult thing. And what I mean by being naked with yourself is sitting there in complete silence and quietening that inner voice that tells you you're shit or arrogant or full of yourself or ugly or incapable or whatever or unlovable, whatever it is, and keeping that quiet and unconditionally loving yourself just for 10 seconds. Watch how long those 10 seconds feel. They feel like an eternity because that voice wants to come in, but you're like, no, you're going to give yourself 10 seconds. Um, those 10 seconds feel really, really long. But once you've achieved 10 seconds, actually you've already lived your fullest life at that point. You loved yourself unconditionally for 10
Yeah.
seconds. Success. You die tomorrow, you've already lived. You have lived the fullest life you could ever possibly live. But the next day, you could do 20 seconds. And then you could do 30. and then you could do a minute. And all of a sudden, it's 3 years later and you love yourself unconditionally every single day, every second of every day, right? And that's what I want to stress is not to start out with, "Oh, tomorrow I'm gonna love myself unconditionally and be really happy with myself." No,
Mm.
you won't. You will not be happy with yourself from one day to the next. It's not gonna happen. Doesn't happen.
Right.
But it takes years. But what is going to happen when you've succeeded in those 10 seconds is that you've succeeded in something. You've done something. You did something right. Okay. And not
Mm.
right by anybody else's standards. You did something right by your own standards and you succeeded at it. You were successful. Those 10 seconds, they were successful. And if you can only do 10 seconds the next day, and if it takes you 2 years to switch to 20 seconds or to switch to a minute, fine. If it takes you 10 years going from 10 seconds of loving yourself unconditionally to 2 minutes of loving yourself unconditionally, fine. Because the next thing that you're gonna learn is to forgive yourself. You're gonna forgive yourself for all the times where you didn't love yourself. And sitting with yourself naked also means that you're going to forgive yourself because you're gonna look at yourself and all your ugliness and your flaws and your frizzy hair and fat deposits where there shouldn't be and crooked nose and earlobes that go the wrong way or whatever. And you're gonna just accept and just gonna be like, you, this is what I look like. This is what I do. Um Painting is one of the most beautiful avenues to be able to sit with yourself naked. Because in portraiture or in live drawing, live painting, um, the human body is examined in such a raw, beautiful way. So if you're looking for something practical that you could do, take a live drawing class and draw a human face. That's not a Kardashian face, but that's a real human
Mm.
face with lines and with wrinkles and where one eye is bigger than the other and the lips are really nice and the neck skin is kind of craggly and but it's a human face. That's what a human face looks like, right? So
Mm.
again, art can be such a beautiful catalyst for these moments of self-acceptance. Um so that's how we get started. We get started with tiny, 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 tiny little step, the smallest step you could possibly take. And then allow yourself to revel in the success of having completed a tiny step. If you're like there have been times when I was so depressed that I couldn't get out of bed, but I put one foot on the ground. I was like, yeah, okay, that's a success. I did better than yesterday because I was able to get a foot out of bed. Um, Not gonna run a marathon. I'm never gonna run a marathon. Like it's never gonna happen. But I went for a walk today, you know? So yeah, tiny steps. And then those tiny steps amount to a very happy existence.
Yes, I feel like that's a great way to leave everyone with, and yeah, it was super important for me to let you go into that in more detail as well.
Yeah.
So thank you
Thank you.
for sharing that. And well, in general, thank you for the conversation.
Thank
And
you.
la- lastly, if all these things that we talked about resonated with the people. If you just want to tell us again, and I'll put all the links in the description as
Fine.
well, so you can easily find it. But where can we find more about you, about
Thank
the stuff you put out? Where can
Mhm.
people find
So my books are all on Amazon. I self-published all my poetry books. So as to not have to go through the hassle of a publisher. Um A collection is in the works, so a traditionally published collection will be out at some point between now and, you know, the next 100 years. Um, so that will also happen. So, but my books are on Amazon. My website is just my name, RonikaMerl.com, where my contact details are. I'm also on Blue Sky, um, which is kind of the Twitter replacement. It's quick. Um, so that's probably the easiest way of reaching out to me and kind of seeing my day to day ideas. Um, and yeah, if anybody wants to get in touch, like genuinely, if anybody feels that's also a huge part of what I do. If you feel like if somebody's listening and they might not know who else to talk to and they really feel like they need to talk to someone about anything, my door is always open. I'm more than happy to listen and to help. And also if obviously in my kind of screenwriting world, if somebody has a project that they need a screenwriter for, also more than happy to help. Um, so yeah, I'm very I think my name is thank God my name is unique enough that if you Google me, you're likely to find me. There aren't many Ronika Merls out there in the world, I don't think.
Right.
Um, so you'll see my face. If you Google me, you'll see my face and you can just click on it. It'll lead you somewhere.
All right. Um, yeah. So, Monica, thank you so much
Thank
for
you
the
so much.
conversation, for taking the time.
Thank you so
Of
much. It
course,
was such
it
a
was a
wonderful conversation. Thank you.